Do you remember, when I was growing up, a fair day's work meant a fair day's pay. I remember that if you had a job, you had health care, you had a pension, you could afford to buy a home, and you could afford your children's college education. Oh, and also a decent car. What the hell has happened? What happened? NAFTA happened. The North American Free Trade Agreement happened. That noble experiment that has turned into a terrible, terrible disaster. Before NAFTA went into effect, this great country, over 200 years of our history, never had a trade deficit of $135 billion in a year. Never. Ever since then, 20 years in a row, we've had a trade deficit of more than $135 billion a year. In fact, in the last 14 years, our trade deficits have been larger than any trade deficit in the history of the United States, any trade deficit anywhere in the entire world. Maybe on Alpha Centauri there are larger trade deficits. I can't really say. That would be speculating. But here on Earth, the last 14 years have been 14 years of unmitigated disaster. We don't have free trade. We have fake trade. We have fake trade. We buy their goods and services with our rectangular green pieces of paper with pictures of dead presidents on them. We give them those rectangular green pieces of paper, but they don't buy an equal amount of our goods and services. They don't do that. We put them to work. They don't put us to work. Instead, what these trade deficits mean is that we are going into debt. Not debt to our millionaires and our billionaires, but debt to foreigners. We started with NAFTA. When NAFTA went into effect, we had a $2 trillion trade surplus. Now we are $11 trillion in debt to foreigners. That is 1/7 of every single asset in America. We are in hock to foreigners for 1/7 of our entire national wealth accumulated over the course of 200 years. $35,000 in debt to foreigners for you, for you, for you, for you, for every single man, woman, and child in America. That is a national disaster. And the end game is an America of cheap labor and debt slavery. And all that has to happen for that terrible tragedy to take place is if we simply let it keep happening. That's the track that we're on right now. With or without fast track, we're already on a fast track to hell. Now we have to stop this. It doesn't have to be that way. In Germany, a country with a strong labor movement, a country where labor unions are represented inside the board of directors on major corporations, year after year, they run trade surpluses. They get wealthier and wealthier and wealthier year after year at our expense. So do the Chinese, $300 billion each year. So do the Japanese. They know how to play the game. They know how to play the game. We are putting tens of millions of foreigners to work year after year while we lose millions of jobs ourselves and go deeper and deeper into debt. We lose twice over. We lose the jobs and we lose our savings with no end in sight. Listen, I am opposed to fast track as much as any human being can. I'm opposed to the Trans-Pacific Partnership as much as any human being can. But that's not enough. We are giving away our country on the cheap. Listen, at some point, we won't even be able to call it America any longer. We'll be East Japan. We'll be the original West Germany. We won't have a country any longer. So I say no to fast track. I say no to the TPP. But I say no to trade treachery. I say no to the insane policies that we have pursued now for an entire generation. No. I say no to all of this And I say we have to take back our government. We have to take back our government from the bureaucrats and the technocrats and the political acrobats and the corporate aristocrats. We have to take back our government from them. And we have to make it a government, again, of the people, by the people, and above all, for the people. For the people, for the people, for the people, for the people. For more than 20 years now, we've had, I hate to say this, a sellout government. And it didn't really matter who was in charge. Democrats, Republicans. The Democrats were slightly less bad than the Republicans. But the fact is, we haven't had good leadership now for a generation or more. When you go into this election next year, and we once again go through this process of choosing our national leaders, there is a litmus test. And the litmus test is this. Are you going to continue down this road to hell, where Americans are left with no health care, no pensions, no decent money to spend, where they have to struggle to pay their credit cards, where they can't afford to buy a house, where college tuition is out of the question for ordinary Americans? Or are we going to turn this around? Americans, you all, we all, are the hardest working people on planet Earth. That is how we've reached a point where we became the wealthiest country in the world. It wasn't because we were swimming in oil. It wasn't because we took from other people. We built this country. We were number one. We need to be number one again. So I say no to fast track, no to the TPP, and yes to good government. Thank you very much.